Okay, I'm in my kitchen now, and this is what we'll be making. The left glass is fermented radishes, and the right glass fermented beetroot. And we're just going to do the same thing or something similar again. I've got the beetroot here. Now this was from the garden, so I washed it gently. You don't want to sanitize it in any way because for fermenting you do need the bacteria, the good bacteria, the lactobacillus. If you're buying beetroot, buy organic. And if you live in a country where food is treated to make it as sterile as possible, you probably won't be able to lacto ferment with it. So yeah, garden is best, organic is second best. And don't scrub it hard, just get the soil off it and it should be fine. And the same goes for the radishes, and this is about 1 kilogram of radishes, and I will be making a slaw from this. So I'll be cutting off the slug damage and the roots, of course, and shredding it in the machine. And I'm not going to let you watch me do that because it's just going to be loud, and you can shred it whichever way you want. Or of course, as you can see here in the left glass, you can also just leave them whole or slice them or whatever. But I'm going to show you 2 different ways of fermenting, which is why I'm shredding these. And the other things I have is here. This is my brine. It's a 2% brine. So 20 grams of salt to 1 liter of water. And in this case, to the American friends who are used to doing things in cups and teaspoons, tablespoons, you do have to go by weight to get a 2% brine. So yeah. And then that's for the beetroot. And for the radishes, I'm going to be adding the sea salt like this. That's also for the 1 kilogram, that's 20 grams of salt. And I'm going to massage that into the radishes, and then some garlic and some peppercorns. And you don't really need a lot to flavor it. The flavor will be intense even if you just put 1 clove to a jar. And then I'm using these German jars, Weck jars, with the rings, and these are rings that I've actually canned with already, so they're not usable for canning anymore. They're a bit too big, but for fermenting it really doesn't matter whether they fit perfectly or not, as long as I can put them between the glass and the lid, that's fine. And I use these lids 1 size smaller than the jar as fermenting weights because they fit in perfectly. So yeah, you'll see me do that later. And gloves for working with the beetroot because I don't want pink hands. All right, I hope you can see. I'm going to make the radish slaw first. All right, I hope you can see. I'm going to make the radish slaw first, and this is how you would also make sauerkraut or something like that. So I'm just going to add the 20 grams of sea salt, and this is sea salt with no additives whatsoever, to the radishes, and knead it in. And basically in fermenting, what the salt does, apart from creating the brine that will cover the radish later on, because it pulls out the water from the radishes, what it also does is it kills off all the bad bacteria, because that's how lacto-fermenting works. The lactobacillus doesn't mind salt, but the bad bacteria, to put it simply, do. So basically the salt keeps the bad bacteria at bay until the lactobacillus takes over after a couple of days. Okay, so as you can see, we have lots of water coming out there. Well, liquid. And I'm just going to let this sit for a while and take care of the beetroot first. Let me just clean off my hands and put on some gloves, and I'll show you how I do the beetroot. And then once those are done, we'll get back to the radish. Okay, for the beetroot, and it really is as simple as that, I take my jar, I add the beetroot and any herbs and spices I want to add. Now if you want to put in herbs, the best thing to do is put in a whole sprig, because with lactofermentation, that is anaerobic fermentation, which means that you don't want any form of oxygen to get at your food. That's what keeps it sterile and keeps it shelf safe, shelf stable. Correctly fermented food does not need to go in the fridge and does not need to be canned. And what keeps it shelf stable is actually that there's no contact to the air anymore. So I'm just going to add one and a half cloves of garlic and some of the peppers. I'm going to add them on top. And as I said, if you add herbs, just add the whole sprig and add it to the bottom. If, for example, you do cucumbers and you add dill and the dill floats to the top, it can get to the top of the brine, and that then can go moldy, and that's what you don't want. So I put that in there, and then I make sure this is room temperature, and actually it isn't. So I'm going to have to continue with this later on. I need this room temperature because I don't want, or not hot at any rate, because I don't want to kill off the lactobacillus that's in there. And yeah, so I'll just put this aside and continue later on. I didn't realize it was still this hot, so I'm just going to wait a while and then continue. Okay, well, I realized that there was definitely enough brine here, so I'll just do that now. We don't have to even wait that long. I'm going to use this to fill it in because it just makes it easier. So basically what I do is I just drop everything into the jar. And firm it down. Now I'm kind of hoping I can get it all in there, because I'd hate to do a second jar for yeah. I think I'm just going to basically add liquid and keep the rest to just eat now. It tastes great actually just as it is. So I'm going to drain all the liquid into it so I can push the radishes under the brine. And as in the other case, I'm adding 3 halves and some peppercorns, because that's really a flavor I like quite a bit. Okay. And I'm going to press it all under the brine using this piece of glass. Let me just see. Okay. It will fit a bit more, so I'm just gonna finish adding this. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't really matter if it hits the top, as long as the glass lid pushes everything completely under the brine. And it can get messy, but in this case it's not as big of a deal as when you're canning. Okay. So what I want to do now is any little bits that flow to the top, I'm going to take them out. I'm actually just going to go and get another lid, a second smaller lid, because I'm afraid that this lid will float to the top. So just to make sure it's really pressed down below the surface, I'm going to get a second lid. And I'll just take a small one. In this case, it really doesn't matter. take off all the little pieces that are floating to the top. And one thing, these jars are not sterile. They're just washed with water and soap. They don't need to be sterile because the lactobacillus, as it turns into lactic acid, will kill off all the bad bacteria. So you don't have to sterilize it in advance. You can, but you don't have to. Okay, that looks good. And now I'm just going to put a ring on here and seal it. And in this case with lacto fermenting, you want the air bubbles to be able to escape. So I'm just putting on 2 clips. Normally with WEC glasses you put on 3 clips. I'm putting on 2. This will allow the air to escape, but no new air to come in there. And because it gets to be such a mess, I'm going to put it in this. It will bubble out and it will make a huge mess. That's just something you need to know. So always put it on a plate or something, because as soon as it starts fermenting, the air bubbles will push through the seal. So you can use a fermentation seal or anything else. The most important thing though is to push everything under the brine. And we have a bit of air left in there, but that's not a problem. All right, so this is finished, and this will stay at room temperature for, well, 2 to 4 weeks depending on the temperatures. Longer in winter, shorter in summer, obviously. And yeah, this is getting to be the right temperature now. Let me just clean this up and then I'll show you the beetroot. All right, and for the beetroot, basically I do the same thing. In this case, I'm actually going to cover it with the lid first, and then just pour my brine over it. And I'm pressing it down to get rid of as many of the air bubbles as possible. Also along the sides. But if you shake the jar a bit during the fermentation process, then any extra air bubbles in the bottom will lift and rise to the top. Okay. And because this makes such a mess, I didn't fill the jar up to the top. As long as you have about 1 to 2 centimeters, you're going to be fine. Okay. And again, I add the seal, in this case a lid or any fermenting seal, so that air can get out but no new air can get in. And put it on a plate. Okay, so basically, let me see if you can see. Yes, you can. We have 2 new jars fermenting. I keep them at room temperature, and then when they've reached the stage that I want them, I try to store them as cool as possible. In the summer, unfortunately that's a bit of a problem because even our cellar is fairly warm, but it's just to slow down the fermentation process, and we don't mind if it keeps fermenting. So yeah, we don't mind terribly having it at ambient temperature. All right, so on the outside, the 2 glasses that I did a couple of weeks ago, and then in the middle, the ones I did today. So in about 2 to 4 weeks time, we will have fermented radish slaw and fermented beetroot that are shelf stable. They don't have to be refrigerated, they don't have to be canned. You can, of course, but if you're working carefully, you don't need to refrigerate them until you open them for the first time. So if you open them to taste them, then of course you have the issue of new bacteria in there. And then personally, I would refrigerate them. I don't do it with sauerkraut, but I make sure to keep everything under the brine and use sterile equipment to take it out of the big crock. But I have started also fermenting my sauerkraut in individual sized, portion sized jars, just so I don't have that issue. But we just don't have the refrigerator space to store all our produce that way. So I hope you enjoyed this video. That was a bit different from usual. I'm sure I'll be making more videos like this where I show you how I store my produce, because quite honestly, we can't eat it all in the summer, and we also want to eat our own food, our homegrown food, in the winter. So storing it and how to store what type of vegetable is a big part of what I do when it comes to the allotment. So I hope you enjoyed this. Do give me a thumbs up. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see, how I store it, how I can my tomato sauce, or how I make fruit leather, or anything else you can think of. If I've never done it before, I'll let you know. I've certainly fermented before, and it's actually my favorite way of storing. It's much simpler than canning in the end. You don't have to sterilize things, and you don't have to worry about any pressure, the correct pressure, or you just have to make sure you put in the salt and to keep everything under the brine. So yeah, it's really easy. I hope to see you again very soon. My next video will probably be the July garden tour. So see you then. Bye for now.